Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to do a video today on waves. So if you're new here, welcome. My name is Melissa and I went through a long, very horrendous, protracted withdrawal. It started with antidepressants and it was pretty bad then, but I was still functional, still working. And then I decided to reinstate because specifically my mental symptoms were so bad. Went back on, had disastrous reinstatement effects, was then polydrugged, took several different SSRIs, benzos, and antipsychotics and anticonvulsants. Every single drug made me worse. I had more and more adverse reactions. I developed movement disorder, akathisia, and I've now been off all meds for 33 months. And I didn't start to turn a corner in my healing until 4.5 years. So that was off my first drug again, but I have like a complicated because I reinstated and had adverse reactions. I know that's a long time, but I've come a really long way. So that's a bit of my history. And I also wanted to say before I get into the details that I am offering one-on-one coaching for those who are looking for it. I do offer it at lower rates than other places you might find online. I have a free 15-minute consultation, 30-minute calls, 60-minute calls, and then I also have 4 session packages that I've put together at a further reduced rate for those who might want to meet a little bit more regularly. I will put the link to my online booking calendar in the description of this video, as well as the link to my website. If you're interested in reading more about my story, you can also book sessions through there. And if you just have a single question to ask me, feel free to email me. I'll put my email address in the description as well. So this video is about waves. So waves are, if you're unfamiliar or if you're familiar with this sort of process, a lot of people experience windows and waves in their nervous system recovery. So windows are when symptoms are less intense or gone completely. There's a little bit of, debate or discussion on what constitutes a window. And then a wave is when symptoms become more severe, they become more intense. And so not everyone has windows and waves. So some people will have a linear recovery, although that I find is quite rare. Some people will just experience wave after wave after wave and just sort of a really poor baseline, and then they will recover, sometimes quickly, usually in that case it's like more of a quick recovery. But I would say the majority of people go through this windows and waves pattern. And the thing with waves is, yes, it's when symptoms come back more intensely or just come back after you've experienced a window. And I've had sort of like debates or arguments with people about waves and whether or not they always need a trigger. So in my personal opinion, I don't think that a wave always needs a trigger. I think that windows and waves are just a part of the recovery process of the nervous system. That's typically how it goes. And I find too that when we try so hard to always, our brain is always searching for reason, right? So if you go into a wave, a more severe symptom state, your brain automatically wants to figure out what happened. Why did this happen? Why did I go into this wave? Why did my symptoms become intense again? Why does it feel like acute again? And so this I've found with people can be a really negative thing. It could be almost a dangerous thing and sort of a slippery slope. So, if you're someone who is really experiencing the windows and wave patterns, obviously there are things that can trigger waves, things that are typically stimulating to the nervous system. So this could be a positive thing like exercise, cardiovascular exercise, or even weight training. It could be just, being too busy and doing too much, whether it's work, whether it's housework, whether it's, just any kind of like physical activity. It could be, something stimulating that you eat or drink. So it could be caffeine, it could be MSG, it could be, artificial sweeteners, which are known excitotoxins, or it could just be nothing. It could just be, I went into a wave because it's part of the recovery process and I'm going to come out of it again. So let me know in the comments what you think or what your experience has been. Do you notice something like is consistently a trigger for you? Or are you someone who's just like, well, waves and windows are typically part of the process? So waves can be incredibly demoralizing. They can be incredibly discouraging, frustrating, especially since they often will come after a time of a window. So when people are experiencing a lessening of symptoms or a remission of symptoms, and then suddenly they sort of crash into this wave. And I talk to people sometimes, they'll book an appointment when they're kind of freaking out because they're like, hey, Melissa, I was doing so well and now I went into this wave, and when does this ever end? Does this ever end, or am I going to be in windows and waves for the rest of my life? So they typically do end, and a lot of times with people, it will be like, this is how it was for me. So it was in my first withdrawal, which was just from SSRIs. I never experienced a window. It was just wave, 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 wave. And I've talked about this in other videos. I believe part of the reason for that is because I was quite unfamiliar with the withdrawal process. It took me 8 months to figure out I was even in antidepressant withdrawal. And then I just really, it was like a combination of not really understanding what was going on and also not really believing it. Because I was like, why should I not be drinking alcohol? It's the one thing that relaxes me. It's the one thing that helps me sleep. And I really was like, went back and forth about, is this really drug damage? Is this really withdrawal? Why are my symptoms not typical of what other people are experiencing? And that was why I eventually reinstated and then went through the polydrugging. And then once I was sure that there was the drugs that were the problem all along, because of the reinstatement, the adverse reactions, and my symptoms getting much worse after reinstatement, even on a low dose, that was when I was really a lot more careful with how I was treating my body. I stopped drinking completely. I'd stopped taking any over-the-counter or prescription medication unless it was life or death situation, like when I was about to have my baby. And I was just really careful with self-care and all of the things that kind of go along with taking care of yourself and your body, and just that contribute to overall and general health. And once I started doing that, I started getting windows that were really short in nature or short in duration after about the 6-month mark from my second withdrawal. So, but again, I have a complicated story, so that doesn't even cover everything. There was a period in my first withdrawal where I went through total remission of symptoms for a few months, and then everything came back and I had no idea why. And then it was just relentless. And that was again why I reinstated. So in this second withdrawal, I started getting short windows after about 6 months. And then it was really window and wave for another, let's see, what was it? Maybe 15 months. And then I felt like I was turning a corner and starting to like kind of rapidly heal. So again, waves are really difficult for so many people. And I do have people reaching out to me that are like, oh my goodness, I've crashed again. Why is this happening? And I have also talked to people who are insistent that waves always have to be tied to a trigger. And so they're always pairing whatever, they ate last or drank last as a reason for why they went into a wave. And I'm not saying that people don't develop sensitivities, because they absolutely do. But I also think that people are so desperate to kind of figure out, what did I do wrong this time? What did I do wrong this time? And then they attribute it to something, whether that's the actual cause or not. And then their world gets really small. So their diet gets, they get down to 5 foods, and, they're afraid to leave the house. They're afraid to smell things. They're afraid to be, too overstimulated, whether it's by people or by scents or by foods or by, it could just be anything. And, this can be, create a world where someone is really not functioning and not able to sort of live any sort of quality of life. Now, again, I'm not discounting histamine issues or MCAS or multiple chemical sensitivities, but I also find that there are people who start to avoid so many things because they're afraid of going into a wave. And my personal philosophy is, in this recovery journey, once you get through the acute stage and you sort of go post-acute, I think the best sort of approach is to nurture the nervous system as much as you can, but also stretch yourself. So what I mean by that is do the most self-care you possibly can. So if you're in a state where you're finally able to sleep as much as you can. Now, I know people who have akathisia and who are in acute a lot of times can't sleep. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about more when you're in a subacute stage and you can rest, or you just find that you're so fatigued that you want to sleep all the time. Sleep. Rest as much as you can. Get as much sunshine as you can. Do low-level exercise. Of course, it depends on what your symptoms are. I'm not saying everybody's able to do all of these things or even some of these things, but this is just things that kind of contribute to that overall health and self-care. So It could include, grounding. It could include, getting your feet in the earth, hugging a tree. It could be um, meditation. I know not everybody can do that, but if you can, just being around people with healthy nervous systems, eating as cleanly as possible, just all of those things that sort of contribute to good self-care. I think that those are absolutely of utmost importance in this recovery process. But then also, whether you get windows, well, especially I guess if you get windows, but just even when your symptoms start to shift a little bit or start to lessen even a little bit, stretching yourself. Exposing yourself, that sounds bad, but I mean exposing yourself to situations where, especially if you're experiencing intense anxiety, agoraphobia, phobias, symptoms like that, or even depression, pushing yourself. I don't even like saying pushing. I like saying stretching yourself and putting yourselves in situations where you take yourself a little bit further, right? Because just like I talked about before, your world can become so incredibly small in this process. So if you can take those moments when you're in a window or when your symptoms aren't super, super intense, again, if you're in a subacute phase or even protracted, or even while you're tapering, and just expose yourself to things that maybe scare you, or maybe you've been unable to do for a while, especially if you were in an intense acute state. I think that's really important. And then learning when to rest, learning when to listen to your body. So, okay, I stretched myself. I went and I was social for an hour. I just, went to a friend's house or a family member's house, or even if it's just 10 minutes and you left and you're like, okay, that was enough for me. I'm feeling revved up, or I'm feeling exhausted, whatever your symptoms are. Now I need to rest. It sounds crazy and it might sound just like basic advice, but I find that people tend to ignore this, or people tend to either push themselves really hard in a window because they're like, oh, I finally feel some semblance of normalcy. I did that many times when I started experiencing windows, and then they really crash. Or, they become, so what did I just say? I just said, yeah, they push themselves too hard and then they crash. So it's really a matter of listening to your body and, or even just pre-planning it. Like, okay, I'm going to push myself or stretch myself, or I'm going to go do all these things that I need to get done that I haven't been able to do, and then take a couple of days to rest. I know everybody's situation is different. Some people have to work, some people have kids to take care of. But I mean, just resting as much as you can when you're not doing those things that you absolutely have to do. And I get that there's a wide spectrum of people with a wide spectrum of symptoms. So just take from this what applies to you and ignore the rest. But in general, this is what I see is helpful for helpful for most people, or for many people in this process. So again, waves are demoralizing. They are frustrating, they are discouraging, but they are part of the process for a lot of people, if not most people in this journey. And a lot of times too, if you can remind yourself that you're going through a wave, it's part of the process. And a lot of the times people will come out of a wave, especially if it's a bad wave, and their baseline will improve, or they'll go into a window, so I do believe that underneath the surface, healing is going on, and people will say, why is this happening? Why am I going into windows and waves? When am I going to be healed? When am I going to be over this? But you have to remember that the healing is happening under the surface. And I'll get into that in another video, where I've seen this a lot. And this was my experience, where it's like, I feel terrible. I feel terrible. I feel terrible. Like, I feel like I've been in acute for months and months and months and months. I'm not seeing any signs of healing. I'm not getting windows. And then all of a sudden, these people will heal overnight, or in a week, or in 2 weeks. So you have to trust that the healing is going on under the surface. I know the forums talk about that, and I'm seeing that, as patterns in my coaching. And so I just wanted to give you those reminders that that's typically, waves are part of the process. A lot of times you'll have an improved baseline, or you'll go into a window afterwards. They don't need to have specific triggers, in my opinion. It's just how recovery tends to go in this situation. And healing is going on underneath, even if you don't see day-to-day evidence of that. As long as you're taking care of yourself, you're avoiding, chemicals and things that affect neurotransmitters as much as possible, and things that contribute to sort of your general toxic load, you will recover over time. Let me know if you have any other questions or comments about waves. Do you experience waves and windows? Do you just experience constant waves? Are you still in acute where you're like, I haven't experienced a window. I don't know if I'm going to be in a windows and waves pattern. What have you typically experienced so far in your journey, and how far off meds are you, or are you tapering? So I love to see your guys' comments. When I see them, I try to read them all, although I don't always respond to them all. Sometimes YouTube deletes them as well. So yeah, and if you're interested in setting up a call, a free consultation, to see if we're a good fit, and I will put that link in the description of this video, and a link to my website if you want to check it out. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.